Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy webinar. I'm Dr. Alex Katehakis. Today is Monday, November 7th, and our topic today is intrigue. I want to just take a moment to remind you of a few things, as I typically do before we start, that you should type your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll answer those as we go along. And to do your best to stay on topic with the topic of intrigue today. And then also to leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon.com for Mirror of Intimacy. Let us know what you love about the book, maybe how you're using the book. Sometimes couples tell me they read it together every morning over their morning coffee, or people say it's their favorite wedding gift to give. So little things like that make it useful for other people that are reading about the book and whether they want to buy it or not, to see just how other people are using it and what they think about it. And then, of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscription button below. That way you never miss a post. And you can also see all the other great offerings we have on our YouTube channel. We have lots and lots of videos on sex and sexuality from sex experts all over the country. And then you can keep up with what we're doing by following us on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. And then you'll see in the chat box as well all the information that you need for calling into one of our intake counselors during this webinar, anything that you'd like to know about our services and our upcoming events. And also if you need resources, even if you're outside of the state of California, we know lots and lots of people all over the country that can help you. All right, so today's quote is from Lord Byron, and he writes, "She knew she was by him beloved. She knew, for quickly comes such knowledge, that his heart was darkened with her shadow." That's a very provocative quote, don't you think? I'm going to read it again. "She knew she was by him beloved. She knew, for quickly comes such knowledge, that his heart was darkened with her shadow." So his heart was captivated by her shadow, and she could feel it. She knew it, because this knowledge, this nonverbal knowledge, this nonverbal communication comes very quickly, and it's also very pointed in its communication. And with that, the word intrigue can carry sort of a dark and mysterious, even foreboding connotation with it. It's used to describe sometimes somebody who is crafty or underhanded, or we see villains that are plotting a story or plotting a play, that they become the the ones that we're intrigued with or intriguing with. And so think about it in those terms also when you think about this term intrigue. But it also can refer to sort of the intricate processes we go through when we're seeking to draw someone else into an affair with us. And I was thinking today about how intrigue is different than flirting, because flirting is something both parties are aware of and both parties are intentionally engaging in, whereas intrigue can happen strictly in the mind. All right, and we write in Mirror of Intimacy that it refers to the intricate machinations of a lover that's seeking to draw someone else into a passionate affair. So these are moments of shifting conversations that we have non-verbally, which I also think is fascinating, that human beings operate on all these different kind of channels or self-states, if you will, where we're able to know what our meaning is internally, but the other person doesn't necessarily know intellectually, but they have a feeling. They have a feeling, just like in the quote, because she says that she knew because for quickly comes such knowledge. For quickly comes that feeling. We have a sense, we have a knowing. And that is the difference with intrigue, is that it differs from that object of desire, which is the flirtation, which can be unavailable or even taboo. such as a married boss or a delinquent teen or a complete stranger. So flirtation can also be sort of more innocent attention that we put on other people without intention. You can flirt with somebody of your same gender or an older person or a younger person, and it doesn't have to have a sexual connotation to it. It can be a cute moment, a fun moment of connection, a sweet moment even. I got on the elevator this morning to come up to my office, and when it opened, this very little boy was standing there. He looked like he was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and it looked like he was alone. And so I had a moment, my face just sort of lit up, and I said hello spontaneously, which is a form of flirtation, connection. And then, of course, as soon as I moved towards being in the elevator, his mother and younger brother or older brother were standing right next to him. So he wasn't alone, but his presence caught me off guard in such a way that it was actually delightful to see him. And there was this innocent attention, this innocent, quote, flirtation with him that was very sweet in that moment, and also ended up engaging his mother as well. So intrigue, involves sending a signal, and it's an unmistakable signal. And it's a vibe, it's a tangible vibe that we all know so well, but we can't really quite define it. So I want you to think about times when you have intrigued with somebody else. And again, you can be doing this with anybody, anywhere, wondering about them, wondering why they have all those tattoos, even if that person might not be your type, wondering what that person would be like sexually, even though you're not interested in having sex with the same sex person, but because they have tattoos or their hair's a certain way, or they're so different than you, or similar, that you start to imagine and even send off nonverbal sexualized signals without even realizing it to that person, where you're now in intrigue. This happened to me recently when I was working out, and there was a woman that was working out next to me who had major tattoos and major spiky hair, and she was incredibly athletic. Not anybody I would ever think about, I think I'll go out with that woman or have sex with that woman or anything like that. But there was something so intriguing about, where did she get those tattoos? When did she get them? What do they mean for her? She had a sexual vibe about her that was quite alive. And so I was intriguing in my head with her, just strictly out of the curiosity and novelty of the situation. Now, I was able to not get distracted from my own workout or start thinking about crossing any kind of boundaries. I mean, I quickly let it go, but that is the tendency of the mind. The tendency of the mind is to go into this kind of intrigue, to wonder, to imagine. And that's one of the unbelievably valuable things about this big brain that we have. When you have a prefrontal cortex the way humans do, we have a capacity for imagination, for abstract thinking, for wondering, all of these different scenarios. Even though we may never ever engage with them, we can still think them and play them out in all sorts of cinematic ways. So the question is, can you do this in a way that has boundaries, that has you not crossing the line? And if so, how much space does it take up in your head? Do you spend hours doing this? Do you do it every day? Does it happen once in a while, like it did to me over the weekend? What is your experience or your relationship with intrigue? Because I find that I don't get into intrigue that often with other people. When I do, there has to be something really unusual about them, like the woman that I was describing. So think about it as a certain way we silently undress someone in our mind. Even if we're carrying on a mundane conversation or doing something mundane, like waiting in line for coffee or at the bank, or sitting and having dinner with a friend or a loved one even. And there are also small clues we leave behind to trigger someone else's curiosity or to stoke the flames of jealousy. So one of the clues would be to deliberately be seeking eye contact with that person, which is then kind of the next level of the intrigue. So in my little intrigue, I didn't do that. I wasn't interested in that person knowing that I was looking at them. I felt sort of self-conscious about it even. But when you step over the line of stoking those flames, of trying to get somebody to return your gaze, then you are in a very different game with them. Now you are in a nonverbal sexual dance with them, or the implication is that you're interested. And if you're with a partner and you do this, and you're doing it deliberately, then you are seeking to stoke the flames of jealousy, to really get that person to be upset or angry or more focused on you in some ways. And so you have to ask yourself why you would do that, if you were on a date, for example. And do you do that often? And if so, what effect does that have on your love life? And how does that affect the people around you? Because it can be quite disrespectful and even cruel at its worst. So it doesn't matter how we do it, how you intrigue, what you intrigue about. And by the way, you can intrigue about, a new pair of shoes, a car you want to buy, where you're constantly thinking about it, noticing it, driving by, wondering, checking it online, seeing if the price has gone down. All of that is an internal process of wanting to have something, of wanting to get it, of imagining what it would be like to have that thing. With people, however, the aim when it crosses that line into getting attention back becomes an erotic high, that we are looking for a hint of validation or a hit of validation, depending on how you're looking at it, and recognition, and some kind of promise that's unspoken that we might, in fact, consummate our desire with this person. We're letting them know, we're sending out these signals, these vibes, if you will, and letting them know that we're interested, and that we want them and we're interested sexually. And it can be a great game of cat and mouse or teasing one another, or anything along those lines, as we are intriguing our way into something that sometimes we don't even really want. It becomes the game, the chase, the seeking, the looking, the intriguing, the wondering, the imagining that becomes the high. And when this process takes place repeatedly, it then becomes habituated. And when it becomes habituated and you are living in fantasy, then you are not living in the reality of your life anymore. That you'd rather be someplace else. You'd rather be experiencing something different than what you have. And that can start to create all sorts of problems down the road, where you can't be present with your own partner. You can't start to see the novelty or the beauty in what's in front of you, because you're always conjuring these spectacular soap operas, if you will, in your mind. Because the erotic mind essentially has no limits and no pride and can go all over the place. And there's really no harm in that if you're not starting to harass somebody. But when you start to lose yourself in that, and it's harder for you to spend time in your own reality, then that's when people can get into trouble. So I'm wondering if there are any thoughts at this point, any comments, any questions. So we have a question here from Nelson. For a recovering sex addict, how does one maintain that self-awareness so intrigue doesn't quickly cross the line of sexual fantasy and triggers? Well, I think using the 3-second rule is a really good idea. That's why the 3-second rule is embedded in the program of Sex Addicts Anonymous. So you have exactly 3 seconds. And when I was having this intrigue with this person at the gym recently, I can't say it lasted much more than that. I noticed her, I noticed the way her body was, and I noticed all of the tattoos. And then I looked away because I realized I didn't want to make that person uncomfortable. I didn't want them to make eye contact with me. I didn't want them to think I was judging them either. Like making them self-conscious, like I thought there was something wrong with them. So I didn't want that communication to go any further than the noticing that I had. So the 3-second rule is there for good reason. And then someone says, any recommendations for discussing these boundaries of intrigue with the partner? And yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's just by simply acknowledging that this is what humans do, that we all do this. And so striking up a conversation that says, hey, I wonder if you do this sometimes, or let me tell you what I do sometimes. And this is where it goes for me. How does it go for you? And what's it like for us, first of all, to talk about this? Are you open to talking about this? That would be the first question. Are you open to talking about this notion of intrigue and flirting and fantasy and where the lines are, and how it makes each of us feel? And how do you handle it? This is how I handle it. Sometimes I'll even tell my partner when I've had an experience like that, like, wow, I saw this person at the gym today and they were really unusual and I noticed them. That way, I don't feel like I'm harboring some kind of secret or something that's inappropriate. But also, if I don't, there was nothing egregious about it that would be offensive anyway, at least in my relationship. So you have to ask about whether your partner is open to having these conversations, because face it, we all fantasize, we all intrigue, we all look. And so why not talk about it? And that neutralizes it very quickly. Shannon writes, can you clarify the difference between intrigue and general obsession? I lost the distinction when you said someone can intrigue over a car that they want. Well, I think general obsession is just that. Obsession does not stop. Intrigue usually happens in the moment. It's a momentary situation, and it's a looking without the other person necessarily looking back, which is more what flirtation is like. You make contact with somebody, you're talking to them during flirtation. Intrigue is happening in your mind, and you're noticing somebody. When you notice them for too long, let's say, you do start to sexualize them or objectify them. That's different than obsession, which is you cannot stop thinking about the person. You can't stop. You're thinking about them all the time. You're worried about what they're doing, when they're doing it. Should you call them? Shouldn't you? Should you drive by their house? Shouldn't you? You cannot get them out of the loop in your brain. That's much more obsessional thinking. And that's much more about avoiding one's life, one's pain altogether. Intrigue does not have that same feeling to it. It stops once the object is out of our window, out of our view. And I use the example of objects, that we can intrigue with objects and wonder about whether we want them or not. If we start to think about them a lot, then generally that means you want the thing. So you should just go buy the shoes or go to the car lot and start looking at those cars and buy a car, and put an end to the thinking about it, because the thinking about it in that way likely means that you really want the thing. So you didn't impulsively buy the shoes or the car, you waited, but you keep thinking about it and wondering what it would be like to see them on your feet or see yourself driving the car. So you go and buy the thing. I am the wife of a sex addict. I know my spouse has been intrigued ad nauseum with many women, yet never with me. Should I be concerned? Well, I think that is definitely a question between the two of you. There's no way to know exactly what goes on in people's heads. And how we manage what goes on in our head has to do with how much we are committed to the agreements in our relationship. And so if our tendency is to constantly intrigue with other people, and that keeps us out of our relationship and out of being relational, then it's up to us to find out what's going on and why we're doing that. We should not be policing the contents of each other's minds, because that's really a zero-sum game. You can't get very far with that. It only creates misery and pain, and it creates separation in the relationship if you're doing it. So if you have an agreement in your relationship that you are there to make each other feel safe and secure, and you're doing something that violates that agreement, then it's incumbent upon you to stop doing it. And if you can't stop doing it, get professional help, so that you can help somebody help you intervene on the doing of it. And Garrett says, I don't think I can accept that intrigue and flirting and fantasy is just how it is. I wouldn't be with the partner who does that. Well, I'm not talking about unbridled intrigue, flirting, and fantasy. I flirted with that little boy today, and that was a beautiful, sweet moment in my morning. And if you couldn't be with me because I do that every day, then we wouldn't be a very good fit, because I flirt with the old lady behind the cash register at CVS. I might look into her eyes and tell her she looks beautiful today or lovely, and we have a nice exchange. I smile at bank tellers and we have moments together. All of this is what I would call a flirtation, a sensuality, an aliveness of the spirit. None of it has any sexual intention whatsoever. Now, if I was out flirting with men all day long, I can see where that would be highly inappropriate and threatening to my relationship. So I wouldn't do that. If I have moments of intrigue like I did over the weekend, which, as I said, happens rarely, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. That person was in my view space. I could see them. We're human beings and we tend to look at novelty. So the best that I or anybody else can do is just stop it, or notice it, stop it, and look away, and not just keep going down that path. And likewise with fantasy. I mean, fantasy is one of our most human vaunted powers. The capacity to imagine, to fantasize putting somebody on the moon is what got us to the moon. Now, all of us aren't going to design spaceships, but to be able to imagine a preferred life, to imagine, where do I want to be 5 years from now? What kind of life do I want to have? That's all fantasy. It's very similar and aligned with visioning, actually. These are particular state changes in the brain. Once all of these things become sexual and they're chronic, then you've got a problem in a relationship. But to say that we should eradicate those things is largely impossible based on the structure of the brain. And if you are someone who does not fantasize, what does that say about me? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what context you're talking about. Are we talking about sexual fantasies? Are we talking about the kind of fantasy I was just talking about what would it be like? Or I have a fantasy about, living in Ireland for a summer and reading poetry and walking through the hills where the great poets walked. I may never do that, but I have a fantasy about it. So if you don't have fantasies about your life, that may be something you want to talk to a professional counselor about, to look at what holds you back, what lights you up, what one thing excites you on any given day. You can have a fantasy about having hot chocolate later this afternoon, and maybe you'll make that happen and maybe you won't. Maybe you'll think better of it because you really don't want the sugar or something. But we fantasize about things a lot. And would approaching, engaging in conversation neutralize the intrigue? I think it does. I think whenever we make anything that's secretive or furtive or shaming explicit, it neutralizes it. So that's why, most people don't talk about most things in their relationships. So being able to say, do you have sexual fantasies to your partner? And for them to say yes, or maybe no. And if so, what is your fantasy? And if not, why not? What do you imagine your fantasy could be? Or what's the thing that most scares you about your sexuality that you don't want to talk about? Maybe that's why you don't have fantasies. And also about this matter of intriguing or flirting given the course of a day or a week. What comes up for you? What do you notice? Sometimes people, at least, in LA, have done such strikingly overblown things to their bodies. It's hard not to look. I mean, it's almost impossible not to look. So just say, wow, I saw this person this week and, they had super spiky purple hair and I couldn't stop looking at it. And not sharing that with your partner, it's like, why not? Any more than you would share something that was maybe more sexualized. And what about that was disturbing to you that you had that feeling or thought? There's something about being honest and being able to accept each other's humanity that is crucial to intimacy. And I don't mean sex, I mean close in intimacy, getting to know each other. And that requires that both parties be able to regulate themselves, that they don't hear it as a threat. And if they do, they talk about the threat in non-threatening ways, that these are adult conversations. Because if you start to get into this pettiness, this jealousy, this ripping each other apart, then it's unsafe to talk about these things. And maybe you should consider the partnership that you're in. Lauren says, would you agree that the degree to which intrigue and flirting is accepted in a relationship depends on the cultural context of the couple and each partner? Yes, and it would also have to do with the agreements that you have with each other, because couples that have a secure relationship have agreements with each other. They have verbal agreements or written agreements, and they do not violate their agreements. So if your agreements are that you talk about these things, and sometimes you laugh about them, or sometimes you can be out together as a couple and both of you are looking at the same person because, again, they're dressed really provocatively or they look a particular way and everybody in the restaurant notices them because they want to be noticed. So to act like you didn't just see that person and I didn't just see that person, we're not going to talk about it because we're both too triggered, is ridiculous on some levels. It's not just ridiculous, it's dishonest, more accurately. That we're too afraid to be honest with ourselves and each other and too busy protecting each other, that starts to, flatten out a lot of the relationship when you can't be honest about these things. Bridget writes, I understand flirting to be all about sex. Is saying I'm available in a way. I wonder if you were flirting with that little boy or just making connection. Intrigue is way different to me and much more dangerous because it's overt and hidden. Flirting is more open and over. Okay, so I would agree that flirting is open. And I would say that my flirtation with that little boy was definitely about making a connection with him. And I did state this earlier, that flirtation is a two-way exchange. Ultimately, I would say the flirtation ended up with his mom, because he was a little startled at my startledness. And she and I exchanged a lovely smile with each other. And I said to her, oh, I thought he was alone for a moment. So that was a connection is what that was. And it was flirty because it was sweet. There was laughter, there was eye contact, but in no way was there anything, because you say you understand flirting to be all about sex. There was nothing remotely sexual about any of those exchanges with her or her son. My point is that intrigue is much more furtive and it happens in, it's covert, it's happening in our heads. It is hidden. It's typically not overt. It can be. Once you make eye contact with someone else and you are giving them a message that you're interested in them, you're cruising them, you're intriguing with them sexually, then it's overt for sure. And then that is a very different boundary crossing in my mind than if it's just happening in your head and you've stopped it and you've moved on with your day. How would you recommend respecting your partner's intrigue, being okay with them being human after there's been extreme cheating, extensive cheating, and you're cautious as a result? Well, again, all you can do is watch your partner's behavior, not what they do or say, because you cannot police the content of their head. You can notice how they show up for you, if they're honest, if they pay attention to you, if they're interested in you, if they love you, if they want to be sexual with you. And what happens in between their ears, the rest of the day is up to them and up to hopefully their community of concern, whether that means a sponsor or other fellows in program or a therapist, that they're keeping current with that and they're doing everything they can to start to intervene on those pathways that are highly habituated. And I will just tell you, I do not have highly habituated fantasy pathways or intrigue pathways where I'm out looking and checking people out all day long. That does not go on for me. But people who are in their sex and love addiction or in recovery do, because they have habituated to those processes. And part of recovery is not just stopping the problematic behaviors, but it's intervening on those neural pathways by using things like the 3-second rule or not putting yourself in harm's way. Or if something happens in a public place, or you notice that you are starting to go way too far with your intrigue, it starts to turn into sexualization of someone, you leave the coffee shop, you leave the restaurant, you move your chair. You're constantly taking concrete actions to get yourself out of those situations. Someone says, can intrigue be a lonely feeling since it's all in one's head and not necessarily appropriate to act out on? Yes, it can be incredibly lonely if that's the only place that you live. So if people, typically that are, addicts in recovery, tend to be very isolated, and that isolation begets more isolation, which is highly problematic. So not letting yourself do that repeatedly is really where you want to land. So again, you have to watch the contents of your own head. You've got to be your own best judge and scientist to make sure that you're not letting these processes run amok, because one of the biggest circuits in the brain is the seeking circuit, and that circuit originates in the brainstem. Every mammal has one. We are salient seeking creatures. We are constantly looking for novelty all the time. We're looking for safety, danger, novelty. There's no way you can stop that from happening until you're dead, I'm pretty much sure. And with the fantasy and the intrigue, you can intervene on those processes. Okay, so intrigue might have its roots in childhood trauma. It can have its roots in family of origin issues. We may have learned early that secretive, duplicitous action rather than direct, honest communication was the best strategy for surviving or for getting our needs met. So that's what I mean. There's a difference between something that is habituated, that is a dissociative pathway, that's an adaptive strategy, which is a distortion of how the brain works, versus being able to enjoy all the spectrums of the rainbow, all of the colors, without getting lost in them. Adam asks, how would you work with the shame someone feels over their desire to engage in intrigue, even though they don't exactly do it? They frequently objectify women and have a desire to intrigue, but are able to abstain from making contact with a woman. Well, I mean, that's somebody who's very avoidant, is what I would say, and that you have to deal and work with those avoidant structures, because that's all about staying safe, not having to deal with the awkwardness of connecting with somebody, flirting with somebody, talking to somebody, asking them to go to coffee. So as long as it stays in their head, they stay in this avoidant pattern. And so that really requires deeper psychotherapeutic work. And those are people that often become sexually avoidant or anorexic. But that is a very lonely place to live. So intrigue always secretes and compartmentalizes our connection with someone rather than publicizing it and expanding it, which is the person that was just being talked about. If I stay in intrigue with somebody down the hall that maybe works on my floor, and I never connect with them, and I always pine for them and wonder about them, that starts to become, certainly a form of love addiction, because I don't ever have to break the fantasy bubble of going and talking to them, of noticing how I feel if they're late for the date, or I don't like the way they chew their food, or they say something that I don't think is funny, they think is funny. Like I don't have to work with my own issues ever. I just keep it in the realm of fantasy and love addiction. So when we engage with people and we're public about it, we're no longer in shame, and we start to tolerate what it means to be human and to be in our humanity and in relationship with somebody. And someone asks, is there a way to reintegrate intrigue with your partner after a breach in trust? And I would say yes, but that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of couples therapy, certainly being through a disclosure process, a lot of healing, and a rebuilding of trust before you can move into these areas. How do you politely reject unwanted connection or flirting? Well, one way to do it is to certainly not return the exchange. If somebody is flirting with you, you don't flirt back. Maybe if they give you a compliment, you say thank you and you change the subject or you move on. At some point, though, if you're starting to feel like somebody's not getting the message, you just have to be direct and explicit. And unfortunately, we live in a world today where everybody would rather text or email than talk on the phone, and would definitely rather do that than make eye contact with somebody and say, hey, do you mind sitting down for a minute? I want to talk to you about something. I notice when we're at work together that often you're making comments about, I don't know, my hair, asking me how I did what I did this weekend or something. And I just want to let you know that while I appreciate your friendliness, I'm not available for a relationship beyond, being a colleague in this office. And sometimes it feels like you're looking for more than that. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how it feels to me. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not available for anything outside of the work we do together. So that is very clear. It's direct, it's polite, it's nice. I'm not out to hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm setting a very clear boundary that I'm not interested. And if the person persists, then you've got a different situation on your hands. But I would suggest that being, kind and direct and telling the truth is always the best way to go. So despite how shady intrigue can feel, it is kind of a covert and steamy energy that can enliven a relationship, a consensual relationship, which was the question somebody else was asking. I can intrigue with my husband just by making eye contact with him in a certain way. And there's something really fun and sexy about that that doesn't ever necessarily lead to anything other than that fun connection in the moment. And then, of course, role playing is one of the greatest methods for introducing excitement into the bedroom. And it frees us from the sort of ordinary, and it allows us to engage our imaginations in good and productive way. And of course, that's another level of intriguing, and that requires conversations and setting things up in a particular way. But the intrigue, you can try intriguing with your dog or cat today. That's a very safe way to do it. You can give them kind of a look in their eyes, smile, wink at them. Your dog might wink back, actually. Sometimes cats, yeah, they might do it also, but involuntarily. So notice, what are you trying to connect to with that creature when you're doing that? What are you trying to say to that creature when you're intriguing them, which is, you're the cutest thing in the world, or I love you so much, I want to eat you, or if I could squeeze you to death, I would, because I love you so much. Or sometimes my cat, if you pet her for too long, she gets ticklish and she bites, her ears go back and her eyes look devilish. And sometimes I'll look her in the eye back, like, don't even try it, because she'll bite, she'll start to attack. So we're having this nonverbal, intriguey conversation with each other. And so try it with your pets. That's probably the safest way to try this nonverbal, secretive communication with them, to see what of that they pick up on. So we need these healthy outlets of expression. They're enticing, they can elicit passion, and it's not about using it for harm, because we probably have been harmed in very despicable ways as a result of it. And we've seen that harm also play out, certainly in movies, where people can think they're dealing with somebody who is respectable and they end up being a psychopath. That's typically the tenor of television shows today. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the healthy, fun, playful energies that accompany both flirting and intrigue. So today, ask yourself how sexual, romantic, or emotional intrigue has touched you. Has it touched you in good ways, bad ways, playful ways, destructive ways? And do you send out sexual vibes hoping others will respond? And if you're doing that, are your conversations with strangers sparked by the need for romantic validation? Are you doing it inappropriately? Have you ever done it in a way where you've crossed a line and you wished you hadn't? And have you ever grilled friends about your ex-lover to keep passion alive with that triangulation? That's another way of intriguing with what are they doing? How are they doing? Another way people do it today certainly is on social media by, you know, you know, sort of stalking or creeping online to see what exes are doing. And this indirect communication towards that person through engaging third parties starts to pull the third party into a not very healthy relationship also. So pay attention to what your motives are, because again, we are creatures that are wired for love and for murder. That's just a fact. We're wired for love and for war. We can kill people or we can love people. And we can use these various channels that we have, these capacities for imagination to build a bomb that destroys the world, or to change the world by building beautiful societies and cultures. We're capable of both. Here's a question. How long does it take to get to the point of being playful again sexually when one is recovering from betrayal trauma and the spouse is working their program? Well, it takes as long as it takes you. Every couple is very unique and individual and different. And there's no way to prescribe how long that takes. It's really up to the couple to work on their relationship together to start to enliven, first of all, states of trust and respect and mutual agreements that are being kept before you can start to engage in play states again. You have to feel very safe to be able to play, regardless of who you are. If you're a child on a playground and the playground doesn't feel safe, or your primary caregiver isn't there to watch out for you, you're not going to be able to play very easily. And if you're scared, you're not going to be able to play. And then, do any of your acquaintances engage in intrigue? And how does it feel to be left out while someone you care about creates intrigue with another? How do you respond to that? This can happen if you are out with a girlfriend, or two males are out together and one person starts to intrigue with someone else. And then you feel like, wow, I went to the party with this person and now they've just abandoned me and left me. And it makes me feel like our friendship is not that great, because maybe that's my doing, because before the party, we didn't talk about what the rules of engagement were going to be here tonight. So think about that also. Who are your friends? Can you trust them when you go out? What are the rules of engagement when it comes to somebody getting lost in someone else without telling you? And how do you respond when that happens? Sometimes the best first step is simply identifying what's happening. So noticing what's going on around you, what the feeling is, again, the vibe is, and then talking to your friend directly about what's happening and the effect it's having on you. And does it make any less personal, or does it make it any less personal to recognize that person's intriguing as a learned, perhaps even addictive behavior? If you feel like you're being co-opted by the intrigue, or you're being completely abandoned or left by the intrigue, when you can start to see like, oh, this person does this all the time, it has nothing to do with me. My only problem here is that I'm hanging out with that person over and over again and being left with the same feeling over and over again. So if it's voluntary, like a friendship, I suggest you get out of it. If it's involuntary, like a spouse, then I suggest you have a very serious conversation about what that person needs to do to get help to stop doing what they're doing and anything else they might be doing that they shouldn't be doing. But when intrigue is at its best, again, it's one of the beautiful processes we have in our brain that allows us to consider, to think, to imagine, to be curious. Someone asked, can childhood trauma create an overtly intrigued personality? Yes, I think, again, that can be a dissociative structure. And that dissociative process would have a person not paying attention to the actual cues of another person. So when I talk about fantasy and intrigue and flirting, I'm talking about them as conscious expressions of who we are. I am not talking about the unconscious adaptive strategies that can become dissociative channels for acting out, for being isolated, for avoiding relationships with actual human beings. Those are very problematic. Those are typically what happens when people are living in the world of sex and love addiction or some kind of pathological dissociation due to childhood trauma. And if that's what you're most struggling with, then your best bet is to be in therapy, to get professional help, because this is not something you can just fix yourself. You cannot. You need a therapist to help you through these processes. If, on the other hand, you're restoring yourself, you are in recovery and you're starting to notice your capacities for play, for fantasy, intrigue, flirting in ways that are healthy with your partner, then that's where you want to be. That recovery is not about an elimination of these structures. It's about starting to become more integrated, more whole, more at one with all of the processes that we have available to us as human beings. So we're more fully functional, so that we feel more alive, so that we can experience these vitality states and fun and interesting and loving and even sexy ways. So thank you for your participation in today's conversation on Intrigue. I hope you found it useful. I also want to wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving and that you have a safe November and that you live in gratitude this month as a practice. And I look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you.